What is going on, fam? It is Mr. Banks coming at you live with a trade recap. I want to go over supply and demand today. I know this is a hot topic, so I kind of want to show more so the intraday supply and demand on these smaller time frames so you can use it to trade, right? But first, go hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of the educational content put out on a daily basis. Hope everyone's having a good Saturday. This is coming a couple days later as I got pretty busy, but I promised you guys I would make this video. So here it is. I want to go over this Tesla call as well as this SPY call that we did, both running over 200% here on the 27th. Now, like I said, it is a couple days late, but I think it's really important to understand how to trade intraday supply and demand when it comes to these smaller time frames. I think a lot of people have a good concept of supply and demand on larger time frames, but I think when it comes to the smaller time frames, they kind of get lost. And yes, you can absolutely trade supply and demand on smaller time frames, just like the big ones. So first one I want to get started with is going to be Tesla and the call that we took on the 27th that went 275%. So when we're looking at supply and demand zones, what are we looking at, right? What is it that we're actually trying to find? What are we looking at? Start with the first question. Well, when we're looking at demand or supply zones, right? What we're looking at is a big balance between buyers and sellers. So let's just take it the day before the 27th right here on the 26th. Right? So here we are, we have a nice balance of buyers and sellers. And then what we want to see is a big move that comes out of it, right? We want to see that big impulse move out of that balance of buyers and sellers, right? So it's pretty much a struggle, right? You'll see it kind of be choppiness and then a big move comes out of it, right? That's going to be your zone, right? That is how you're going to draw your zone. Now you can either do wick to wick, you could do a body to wick, body to body. In this case, I drew body to body because we had this nice tight balance and the big move came when we broke out of the body of the zone here. So you guys want to take a look right here. Nice balance. And then we got to the top, right? So the body of the candle, I'm on a 2-minute time frame. So guys, I take my entries on the 2-minute time frame. So this is where I draw my supply and demand zones. If you use the 5-minute, you can also use the 5-minute time frame. That is perfectly okay. I just prefer the 2-minute. So here on the 2-minute, we have this nice balance. See that at the top of this candle, yes, we have a big wick up, but the body is still in line with the top of at least this other body. So I drew this supply and demand zone body to body in this instance. And then we saw this big move out of it where we could see that these two bodies line up and then the move happens out of this nice little zone. So this is how I drew my zone here on the 26th. And as we could see, we broke out of it when we came back. We pretty much stayed in this zone all day long, right? So to me, what I'm seeing right here is that there's a lot of a lot of accumulation is happening, right? Sellers had control in the morning. They try to take it under, they bought it up, and now I see a lot of accumulation in this zone, right? So now I'm going to call this my demand zone here for this day, right? I think the 26th was that Wednesday, right? Last Wednesday. Once we broke below, right? I would say this is accumulation. So I'd say this is a heavy now demand zone. If you want to take a look at the bigger picture, right? We had a massive sell-off. So on the 26th was right here, right? Tesla has just been selling off pretty much since April 19th, right? So here on the 26th, what did we see? We saw a big drop, and then we started to see accumulation start to happen here on the 26th. So let's go take a look back here again. Sorry, pull it back real quick for you guys. All right, so we did see a slight drop off at the end of the day, but what I was really seeing was, there's a lot of demand here. There's accumulation happening. Like I said, this is where I drew my zone on that day. Now let's go back to the day. This is the day that we actually took those Tesla calls for 275%. So we still have our zone drawn from the previous day, right? Once we broke back above, right? So we did have a big zone here, right? Lots of buyers and sellers, big chop. We did reject this zone first, but what did I see here once we came back up and rejected this demand zone, right? We saw a slight pullback. So if we see a slight pullback like this in a big demand zone, I guess you would say turn supply in this instance, right? Because we came back up, kind of turned supply. Institutional sellers aren't there, right? If we really saw the big boys selling, we would see another massive sell-off, right? A way bigger sell-off when it came back to the zone, but we didn't, right? We didn't see a massive sell-off. We only saw a slight pullback when we entered this zone. So, guys, one thing to keep in mind is when we enter into a supply or demand zone, if the move is very weak out of that zone, more than likely that zone is not as strong when we hit it, right? So in this instance, I said it was a strong demand zone, but for this instance, it's not a strong supply zone, right? So, I mean, we even saw the day before where we saw a lot of buying occur, right? A lot of accumulation occur. And when we came back into the zone, the next day, we came back right into this demand zone. It turned into a supply, but that supply was very limited, right? We only saw a slight pullback from this zone, right? When it acted as supply. So in my mind, right, what this price action is telling you is that it's not heavy supply. It did have a flip, correct, but it's not a heavy supply zone. Why? It's only a slight pullback. We needed to see a big move out of it in order for that demand supply to flip, right? We only saw a slight pullback. That means there's not really big sellers happening here, right? And when we came back up, we saw demand again. Buyers are now outweighing sellers, and we saw a nice move up towards the end of the day, right? So this is where we caught it for a nice 275% move. So this is my thinking on it, guys, right? Come over here. We'll review real quick. Drew my zone. The previous day, yes, we dropped out of it. This is showing me, okay, this is a zone. But when we came back into it, we pretty much saw accumulation happening within it for the rest of the day, right? For the rest of the day. And we did have a slight sell-off at the end of the day. But what happened when we came back into it? Well, in pre-market, we did hit it. And obviously it was a flipped because we sold through it and came back up top. So this demand now turned into a supply, right? We kind of just stayed there all pre-market. We had some news in the morning. And then once we came back out in the open, right, we never broke below pre-market low. And when we entered back into the zone, we only had a slight pullback. There was no major sell-off occurring in the zone. So once this happened, this was telling me, okay, more than likely this zone is going to turn back into a demand, right? And we're going to head higher. For one, on Wednesday, we never broke pre-market low, which is one. We went back into this zone, right? It did sell off as a supply, but only very slightly pullback, nothing major. And then we entered back into it as a demand and pretty much saw accumulation again into the zone. False breakout, right? Going to catch all of retailers offside selling their positions. And then we had a massive move out of it up into the end of the day, going for 275%. So this is how I drew my zone. This is how I played it, right? So I drew it because we had that balance and major move out of it, for one. Then we had demand the rest of the day. When we came back up to it the next day, we hadn't had a slight pullback and then back into that demand again. So this is how I played this supply and demand zone on intraday level. Let's look at one more example on that day. when we played SPY. I know a lot of people got massively shooken out on this trade while we caught it, right? So what were we seeing on this trade for supply and demand on the SPY trade that we took as well, right? For 218%. Well, kind of same thing. We came up, right? We never broke pre-market low. And then for this instance, which was a very bullish case, we broke above pre-market high here on SPY. So we're above pre-market high. It's very bullish in my sense, right? It's a bullish thesis. And then what happened? We created this nice little demand, right? We have a balance of buyers and sellers. And then the big move, there's a big move, impulse move, you would say, come out of it. Once this impulse move happened, I know a lot of people wanted to get long and they kind of stayed in their position. So we did have a back test at the top of the zone, and then we kind of sold back into it. So looking at this, right, we drew our demand zone. What happened here? We had a base rally, come back to base, hold in this demand, right? So we're still holding in this demand. We're still above pre-market high. This is showing me, right, that the case is more than likely we're going to head higher again for the day. When we entered back into this demand, we didn't have a sell-off through it because more often than not, once we have a intraday or any kind of demand zone and we break above and come back into that base, right? These demand zones are called bases. If we come back into it, we usually sell through that demand, right? That demand turns into supply very quickly once we come back to it. In this case, that did not happen. We actually based for a while, for almost an hour in this demand, showing us more than likely this is accumulation that is happening. Now, I know a lot of people probably came up here, bought some calls, and then sold. Once we came back into this zone and started selling off a little bit, they probably cut their calls. But you shouldn't have cut your calls because this was a zone. This was a level, right? If you know me, I personally like to use levels as my stop losses versus a percentage. Why? Because of things like this specifically. If you had a tight stop off of like 10, 20%, you were out of it, right? You're out of that trade, especially if you bought near the top trying to play this breakout. But to keep in mind, we never broke a major level. We never broke this pre-market high, and we never broke this big demand zone. So start to use zones as your stop losses. I guarantee if you start to do that, you will have much better trades, much better success. You won't be seeing these trades where, oh, it hit my stop loss and now it ran into the direction that I wanted it to run, right? You'll actually hold on to it. It will hit back into your level, into your zone, and then it will head back into your direction, right? You got to get used to being read a little bit on the trade. Now, if you bought the top of this, yes, that's a bad entry. You really needed to wait for a breakout and retest. This would have been a better entry. Therefore, this pullback right here, you probably would have sold on this pop and then held runners into this pullback, and you could have made a heavier entry here once we did pull back into the zone, right? So demand, and then we headed higher, right? So this is how I played this intraday demand zone here on SPY. And I saw the timeline. I saw a lot of people get shaken out here. But really, you shouldn't have gotten shaken out. For one, we came back into demand, right, and held. Two, if you bought the top, right, not a good entry. So you should have had a better entry where we broke out of the demand, had a back test right here. So this would have been a great entry. Maybe sold on this pop, held runners. And then once we rallied back into this base, right, we would have went heavier into that trade. And then we would have had a nice move towards the end of the day for over 200%. So this is how I drew my zones. This is intraday supply and demand. Very, very simple. I hope you guys took a lot from this. I'll try to make more videos on this. But guys, when we're looking at supply and demand, we're looking at balance in between buyers and sellers and a big move that comes out of it. We want to see that balance and then a impulse move out of that. This will show you your zone. And we could see it clear as day both times here. Balance, breakout, balance, massive move out of it, right? So Supply and demand zones, please use it for intraday. They're very great tools for you to use intraday to trade among with levels or EMA, whichever other indicators that you like to use. So I appreciate you guys coming out. Promise you guys this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Please share this video so others can learn. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Let's become better traders 1% every day. All right. Love you guys. I'll see you guys later.